Chapter 5. Previously, after exposing Silas Vane's sabotage and securing his arrest, Elias faces a new crisis as Alina Vance reveals that the antagonist has embargoed all legitimate hardware supplies to Aether Core. Forced to pivot to the black market, the team must now rely on Kenji Sato's underground connections to keep their prototype running against a total industry blockade. Now, Chapter 5 begins. The alarm wasn't a sound. It was a vibration that rattled the teeth of everyone in Aether Core's repurposed warehouse. Red warning glyphs scrolled across every monitor, painting the dim space in the color of emergency. "It's not just overheating," Maya Lin said, her voice tight as she tapped furiously on her thermal imaging tablet. "It's throttling, deliberately." Elias Thorne stood over the junkyard cluster, the heterogeneous beast of a server rack they had cobbled together from discarded GPUs and salvaged logic boards. Smoke curled lazily from the primary power distribution unit, carrying the acrid scent of fried silicon. The hum of the cooling fans had dropped to a wheeze, then silence. "Kenji," Elias barked, not looking away from the dying machine. "Kill the load. Isolate the primary bus." "I can't," Kenji Sato replied, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard that looked older than the building itself. "The firmware locked us out. It's rejecting any command that isn't signed by a Vane Dynamics root certificate. We're bricked, Elias. If we don't reboot within 10 minutes, the thermal cascade will fuse the capacitors permanently. The cluster is dead." Maya spun her tablet around, showing Elias the heat map. Bright white hotspots bloomed across the cheap power regulators Kenji had sourced from the black market 3 days ago. "Look at the pattern. It's not random failure. These components have a hidden timer. 48 hours of continuous operation, then a hard lockout. This was a trap." Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach, heavier than the humidity in the room. Silas Vane hadn't just embargoed legitimate suppliers, he had poisoned the well. Every black market dealer in the industrial district was likely selling bin-grade hardware preloaded with kill switches. They were being choked out by invisible hands before they could even onboard their first paying client. "Can we code around it?" Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. "No," Maya said, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and resolve. "This is hardware-level enforcement. We need raw, unregulated industrial capacitors. Nothing with a smart chip, nothing traceable." "The only place those exist is the scrap yard auction," Kenji muttered, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "And you know who dominates the bidding floor tonight?" "Vane Dynamics proxies," Elias finished. He grabbed his jacket, the fabric stiff with dust. "Then that's where we're going." The scrap yard auction was held in the cavernous belly of a decommissioned foundry, a space so vast the ceiling disappeared into shadows and smog. The air smelled of ozone, rust, and desperation. Hundreds of dealers, hackers, and indie founders milled around lots of scavenged tech, their faces illuminated by the glow of handheld scanners. When Elias and Kenji pushed through the crowd, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers rippled outward like a shockwave. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. Elias recognized the look immediately. The gaze reserved for a traitor, or perhaps more accurately, a man who had punched a giant in the throat and somehow survived. "Heads up," Kenji murmured, adjusting the collar of his coat to hide the deck strapped to his forearm. 3 o'clock, that's Marcus's proxy." Standing near the central podium was a man in a sharp, ill-fitting suit that tried too hard to look corporate. It was Julian Vane's former lieutenant, a man named Holloway, now reduced to running errands for the ruins of the Vane Empire. He held a sleek corporate credit chip between 2 fingers, flashing it like a weapon. Holloway spotted them and grinned, stepping into their path. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a small arena of silence around them. "Well, if it isn't the Junkyard King," Holloway called out, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "Come to beg for scraps, Thorne? Or did you finally realize your little toy needs real parts?" "We're here to bid, Holloway," Elias said, keeping his voice level. "Just like everyone else." Bid, Holloway laughed, a harsh, barking sound. With what money? Your accounts are frozen, your supply lines are cut. I'm here for lot 404. Industrial-grade capacitors, pure analog storage, exactly what your failing cluster needs. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only Elias and Kenji could hear, though his smirk remained directed at the surrounding crowd. I'll tell you what, sign this non-compete clause. Admit your kernel is stolen IP, agree to dissolve Aether Core, and I'll sell you the lot. At a 500% markup, of course. Consider it a severance package. He waved a digital slate under Elias' nose. The terms were predatory, designed to strip them of everything they had built. The crowd watched, waiting for the collapse. In this world, failure was public and mercy was non-existent. Elias looked at the slate, then at Holloway's hand, and finally at the corporate credit chip glinting in the harsh overhead lights. His panic from the workshop evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. You're using a Vane Dynamics corporate card for this purchase, Elias asked casually. Holloway blinked, thrown off by the question. Obviously, best rates, why? And you're bidding on hazardous energy storage units without a Class 4 safety license. Elias continued, his eyes drifting to the auctioneer's drone hovering above the stage. Holloway's smile faltered. My license is, pending renewal, Vane Dynamics covers me. Actually, Elias said, stepping back and raising his voice slightly, Vane Dynamics revoked all field licenses for terminated personnel 48 hours ago. I read the compliance bulletin this morning. Didn't you? He caught Kenji's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Kenji didn't move his hands visibly, but beneath his coat, his deck interfaced with the local auction network. He wasn't stealing funds, he was injecting a query. A simple, automated compliance check triggered by the specific combination of a corporate card and a restricted hazardous material lot. On the stage, the auctioneer, a bored-looking woman with cybernetic ocular implants, paused. Her internal feed lit up with a priority alert. She looked down at Holloway, her expression shifting from indifference to sharp scrutiny. Bidder 74, the auctioneer announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Please present valid Class 4 safety credentials for Lot 404. Immediate verification required. Holloway flushed, fumbling with his datapad. It's a glitch. Call Silas. He'll authorize it. Authorization denied, the auctioneer stated flatly. Compliance Drone 9, verify transaction. From the rafters, a sleek, silver drone descended on silent rotors. It hovered inches from Holloway's face, scanning his retinal pattern and the chip in his hand. A red laser grid enveloped him. Violation detected, the drone intoned, its synthetic voice booming. Unauthorized attempt to purchase hazardous energy storage. Asset freeze initiated. Lot 404 confiscated as evidence of regulatory breach. The crowd gasped. Holloway stared at his credit chip as it turned a dull, dead gray in his hand. No, you can't do this. I represent Vane. You represent a liability, the auctioneer snapped. Security, escort this individual off the premises. Two heavy-set enforcers moved in, grabbing Holloway by the arms. He struggled, shouting threats that sounded hollow in the face of immediate financial ruin. As he was dragged away, his eyes locked onto Elias, filled with pure venom. But Elias didn't flinch. He watched the humiliation play out, the public dismantling of a man who thought rules only applied to other people. With Holloway gone, the lot sat in limbo. Confiscated goods were a headache for the auction house. They couldn't be sold normally, and holding them incurred fines. Elias stepped forward, raising a hand. Auctioneer. She looked down at him, wary. Thorne, you know the rules. Confiscated lots are sealed. Not if they're declared damaged or contaminated, Elias said smoothly. If a buyer assumes full legal liability for disposal and certifies the items as scrap, the regulatory hold lifts. It's in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Industrial Waste Act. I'll take the lot. Scrap value. Cash. The auctioneer hesitated, doing the math in her head. Keeping the lot meant paperwork and potential fines. Selling it as scrap to a known disruptor who willingly took the risk cleared her floor immediately. "Done," she said, slamming her gavel. Lot 404 sold to Aether Core for scrap valuation. Payment processed. The price was pennies on the dollar. As the forklift moved the heavy crates toward them, Kenji let out a low whistle. "You played the bureaucracy against them. That was beautiful." "It's not beauty," Elias said, watching the crates being loaded onto their transport skid. "It's survival. Let's get these home before Vane realizes what happened." Back at the workshop, the installation was a blur of motion. Maya and Kenji worked in tandem, ripping out the fried, smart-chipped regulators and slotting in the bulky, dumb industrial capacitors. They were ugly, heavy things, coated in grease and stamped with warning labels, but they were free of firmware locks. As the final connection clicked into place, Elias hit the master switch. The warehouse held its breath. Then, a low hum began, growing steadily into a powerful thrum. The cooling fans spun up, a roar of air that sounded like victory. On the monitors, the red warning glyphs vanished, replaced by steady green streams of data. The temperature readings stabilized. The junkyard cluster was alive. "We're operational," Maya whispered, slumping against a workbench, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "We actually did it." Elias allowed himself a small smile, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. "Good work, team. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the stress tests." "Wait," Maya said, staring at her tablet. "Elias, look at the transaction receipt from the auction." He walked over. The digital receipt on her screen was standard, except for a tiny, encrypted data packet embedded in the metadata footer. It wasn't part of the auction system. "That's Alina," Elias realized. She must have routed the payment through her shell companies to facilitate the scrap loophole. "It's not just a receipt," Maya said, her fingers dancing over the decryption key Elias provided from his own secure drive. "It's a pointer." The screen resolved into a complex topological map. It showed a server architecture that shouldn't exist, a ghost server, hidden behind layers of obfuscation, pulsing with massive amounts of data traffic. "Silas Vane's off-book AI training cluster," Elias breathed, reading the tags. "He's been running illegal models on unauthorized hardware. If this gets out, he's finished." "But there's a catch," Kenji noted, pointing to a blinking red icon on the map. "Access requires a physical biometric key. Specifically, a retinal and neural signature match from a sitting Vane Dynamics executive, level 5 clearance or higher." The room went silent again, but the mood had shifted. The panic of survival was gone, replaced by a daunting new reality. They had secured the hardware to keep the lights on, but Alina Vance hadn't just saved them. She had handed them a loaded gun and pointed it at the heart of their enemy. "She didn't just help us survive," Elias said, staring at the map of the ghost server. "She's pushing us to go on the offensive." "To get that key," Maya said, her voice quiet but steady, "we can't hide in the junkyard anymore. We have to go inside Vane Dynamics headquarters." Elias looked at the humming cluster, then at the map, and finally at his team. The game had changed. They were no longer just trying to stay alive, they were hunting. "Then we better start planning the infiltration," Elias said, his voice hardening with determination. "Because if Silas thinks we're done, he's about to learn exactly how wrong he is." In the next chapter, with Silas's biometric hash secured, but the data copy destroyed, Elias realizes they have only 4 hours to breach the ghost server before the key expires, and their only lead vanishes forever.